Oh, hi there. Welcome to Liberty.me Live. I'm Lucy Steigerwald, and I'm here again with Sheldon Richman, as usual. Last time I was not here and Jeff Tucker was, so now I feel like I gotta fill in for Jeff, which are the shoes and the bow tie are too big for me. But anyway, alright, so we're back to normal here. You know Sheldon from the Freeman and Freedom Daily and Reason and his own free association blog, and he is affiliated with Center for a Stateless Society as well. You know him. You gotta know him. And we're here to talk about an extra depressing topic, which is ISIS, and I think, if I may be so bold as to assume, the larger question as well, what to do with sort of the brand new foreign enemy, you know, the brand new worst people in the world, what libertarians are to do, that sort of thing. So Sheldon, hi, I'm glad you're here.
Hi, glad you're back. Missed you 2 weeks ago. It was fun with Jeff, but it would have been three of us should do one sometime together. That sounds like it would be fun.
That would be very good. Yeah, I'm ready.
ISIS. I think a good way to start would be this speech that Jeb Bush gave on foreign policy, and also his brother. You know, just that we had faulty intelligence, and I heard him say on TV that overthrowing Saddam has worked out pretty well. That's a direct quote.
And yet
and you have to wonder, where does he spend his time?
He also was like bowing to sort of public pressure by admitting that, like, maybe he wouldn't have, you know, he wouldn't have begun the war if he'd been president back then. So that's sort of, you know, acknowledging public opinion that it wasn't the best idea, but he still has to sort of blame Obama instead of his own brother for things really going awry. So I mean,
did he say what? Did he say if he only knew then what he thought we knew back then, that he wouldn't have started the war?
He kind of
did he say that?
After like 3 days of waffling a couple of months ago, he kind of eventually like had that drool out of the side of his mouth. But you know, it's pure public opinion, certainly.
He did say a lot of mistakes were made by a lot of people. So one of those broad claims, which I guess includes his brother, without singling out his brother. Because when you look at who's advising him, it's all the people that, most of them, who are advising his brother. So can't say there's a whole lot of progress there. You know, because the Republican plan here, the approach is to try to shift the blame to Obama for what's been happening in Syria and Iraq and the Middle East generally. So to do that, they have to claim that Bush basically won the war with the surge, that Obama, you know, hastily got out in 2011, that led to all the bad stuff. Now you have to really rewrite history to believe that, or to tell yourself that, and it prompted the thought on Facebook and a few other places that politicians who rewrite history condemn us to repeat it.
Yeah,
because
that's a good one.
I mean, this is such a flagrant rewriting of history that anybody who is paying the least bit of attention hearing that from a Republican, you know, ought to be just demanding that they shut up and leave the stage, because they have no right to be speaking on serious topics. I mean, you know, of course we have the great myth that the surge worked. You can find some great stuff on any war debunking that. Eric Margulies and other people have you know, taken that apart. But that's the great myth that began, you know, at the time. You had McCain and everybody saying the surge worked, and I remember they were demanding of Obama that he, you know, publicly say the surge worked, or else, you know, he would be, I don't know, burned at the stake or something. It was like a religious thing. It seemed like the Inquisition, right? Say the surge worked.
Yeah.
If you say that, we'll, you know, let you live. Otherwise, we will burn you. That's what it was like. You weren't allowed to question whether the surge worked. Of course, it killed many Iraqis, and I think 2,000 additional Americans. And it didn't work because it didn't accomplish what it was supposed to accomplish. People forget it was supposed to accomplish a whole bunch of things, right? Politically, it wasn't primarily for military purposes. It was supposed to bring about reconciliation in the country and bring the Sunnis into sort of regular life there, so that they wouldn't be resentful of the Shiite. It didn't do any of those things, and even the diminution of violence that occurred after that time was really the result of two things. The U.S. started paying the Sunni warlords in Anbar province to kill Al-Qaeda rather than kill Americans, so they just started spreading money around. And this was the awakening, right? The Sunni awakening, which was in effect even before it was offered and began, I think, before the surge. And then the violence diminished in Baghdad because the Shia completed their ethnic cleansing of Baghdad. They drove most of the Sunnis out, and so the violence ended there. And then also you had the militias, and I think Muqtada's army, his Mahdi army, believing that if they cooled it, that would hasten the American exit, and they wanted the Americans out. So they figured, hey, cool it, let's stop attacking Americans, and let things calm down, and they'll leave. But to act like it was some big victory that Obama then later blew because he didn't leave a force there is wrong. And then number two, it was Bush who signed the Status of Forces Agreement calling for the U.S. to leave by the end of 2011. He tried to stay, but Maliki, the former prime minister, wouldn't grant a demand of Bush's, namely that if when American GIs behaved badly, Maliki said they should be subject to Iraqi law, and the U.S. wouldn't tolerate that. Bush wouldn't tolerate that, and so they couldn't cut a deal to keep even a residual force there. And even as 2011 was coming to a close, Obama was over there. He was sending Panetta or whoever was whoever was his war secretary at the time, begging Maliki to invite us to stay, but he wouldn't do it. So Obama tried to stay, but under the terms of an agreement signed by the George Bush administration, the U.S. was obligated to leave. Now, you won't hear Jeb Bush say this or any of the Republicans, because that then means Obama, as bad as he's been about this, is not the cause of all this bad stuff going on.
Well, I mean, presumably, did they want Obama to just forcibly stay? I mean, did they want him to violate the treaty that George W. Bush did sign and just stop leading from behind and just stay there, whether Iraq wanted it or not? I guess that's what they wanted.
Margulies or someone said, what did they want Bush to? Did they want Obama to reinvade Iraq? Well, he has reinvaded Iraq. He's putting troops into Iraq. They're bombing Syria. So I don't really know why they're complaining about Obama. He's been pretty hawkish on this stuff. He boasts that he's good at killing people, and he drone kills people, and the only reason they can't admit he's doing what they would be doing is because he's a Democrat.
Right.
That's the sole reason.
I've always wondered why Republicans hate Hillary Clinton so much for similar reasons. She's a huge hawk. I mean, she doesn't, want rigorous Fourth Amendment protections for you or for I. I mean, she was never very socially liberal, except when, the pressures of the time made it so that she had to be, finally. I mean, she seems kind of up their alley in all the worst ways. But, of course, she's a Democrat and is married to Bill Clinton. And that's all you need, really.
Well, she says she regrets her vote on Iraq. I think that's clearly a political regret, because if she regretted it so much, why did she push Obama to invade or to bomb Libya, to implement the regime change in Libya, which has had horrible consequences, very similar to what's going on in Iraq and Syria? Why did she call for Assad and say he cannot stay, when that turned Syria into a magnet for the Salafists, the jihadists, who then flocked from Iraq into Syria, and then came back to Iraq to help establish the Islamic State, which straddles that border, that former border. She was so regretful of that vote, she wouldn't have done those things. So I think we're entitled to believe she doesn't regret the vote, except in the political sense. It came back to haunt her.
It doesn't matter if she personally regrets it or not. That's a mere curiosity. It doesn't have any consequences.
Mm-hmm.
But as I'm saying, I think when Jeb Bush was, as we just talked about, was being pushed into sort of, admitting whether he believes it or not that the war was bad, he was saying if I had known what we know now, I wouldn't have gone in. And there doesn't appear to be a politician on earth who. We need someone who knew it was going to be a bad idea. It's not as if you have to be, some sort of seer to have said this is a bad idea. It's like we have to destroy an entire country, an entire region, and then wait 13 years before we think, oh my goodness, I guess we shouldn't have done that. Like, we could have known.
Yeah.
I had a good inkling at age 16 that it was a bad idea.
Well, and a lot of people were saying it. It's not hindsight, because plenty of people were saying it at the time. And that reminds me of another myth that has existed since back then, but the Republicans, of course, like to trot it out. Namely that Bush went in as the result of faulty intelligence. And as Margulies and others have pointed out, that's just a lie. It wasn't faulty intelligence. It was manipulated intelligence at the behest of Cheney, who actually was the real president of the United States. You're not going to see Jeb mentioning that. There were people talking to the McClatchy reporters in those days. It was Knight Ridder in those days, and to the AP and to other people, pointing out that the stuff that the Bush administration was saying about evidence of WMD, and they knew exactly where it was. Remember, Rumsfeld said, we know where the stuff is. Cheney said, we know where the stuff is. Then later they said, well, we never said we knew where the stuff is. There were people at the time in the intelligence organizations leaking to the press that this is crappy intelligence. It's being manipulated by Cheney. Cheney went over to the CIA and said, hey, get me stuff on Iraq, that Iraq was involved in 9/11. And then they were taking this shoddy stuff from Curveball, their informant, who turned out to be, totally full of it. And I refuse to believe they didn't know that guy was, shouldn't have been believed. So it was not faulty intelligence. And then it was to use the phrase of the Brits, it was sexed up, right? They talked about how a report of Blair's was, quote, sexed up. In other words, lies were added to it to make it sound scary, that we were all under threat of a nuclear weapon from Saddam Hussein. And Colin Powell said this before the UN. Condoleezza Rice was out there talking about a mushroom cloud, and we can't afford to wait for the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud. Bush was repeating that. It was not faulty intelligence, because if you go back, you can find plenty of accounts, there's books about this. People at the time were saying this is wrong, this is manipulated by Cheney and company. They didn't just make honest mistakes.
No, nothing honest about it. And
no,
at the end,
the smoke. Look, the buildings were still coming down in New York, and Cheney said, "We got to get Iraq."
Truly?
We know that. We know that.
Yeah.
Because people have said it. Richard Clark, the guy that used to be in the National Security Council, plenty of people have written books and talked about this. They said, get me evidence that it's Iraq, we want to get Iraq. And don't forget, from the 90s, the neocons already had a blueprint for taking out Iraq, Syria, Libya, and eventually Iran.
But I always
It was a 1996 study that... It wasn't a study, it was a plan of action. Sorry, go ahead.
It sounds so conspiratorial, but I mean, I know that it's all out there. It's not. It's there. I guess.
No, they published it, right?
Yeah.
Right. You can find it on Scott Horton's site. You can read the text. It wasn't a secret at the time. The organization that sponsored it, I think, has since taken it down. But lots of other places captured it back when it was on the web and have it. And Scott Horton has it in his document section.
I guess what I never know is what do they. All right, so you can claim, Saddam has a nuke and chemical weapons and he's going to use them and we're all in danger and we have to act now and all that. But you still, the idea of the long-term consequences of coming into Iraq and of deposing Saddam, I mean, that's another thing where there's no honest mistake there. And I'm always, what did they want to happen? They just wanted to keep on going and going into Iran next and just following the blueprint that had been laid out before. I mean, I don't know. I just want to point to ISIS and say, is this what you wanted, Yeah. And they'll say, no, we wanted to crush the region completely so that somehow ISIS or something similar could never grow, but that is unrealistic.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, but it's interesting you mentioned that. They weren't oblivious to that. And we know this because recently, because of Freedom of Information action, a 2012 Defense Information Agency document was released. Brad Hoff at LevantReport.com has written a lot about this, and you can find it a lot of places. This was a report put together by the Defense Information Agency and passed up the chain of command. Presumably the President of the United States saw it. This was 2012. This was dated August 12, 2012. And it said the two most important points, it seems, say this. Opposition forces, talking about Syria now. Opposition, don't forget, Syria is an ally, or the Syrian regime is an ally of Iran. So the reason the U.S. wants to get rid of Assad is because they believe it would weaken Iran. As Obama told Jeffrey Goldberg in an interview some years ago. Anyway, this DIA report says opposition forces, in other words, opposition to Assad, are trying to control the eastern areas of Syria adjacent to the western Iraqi provinces, Mosul and Anbar, in addition to neighboring Turkish borders. Western countries, the Gulf states, and Turkey are supporting these efforts. This hypothesis is most likely in accordance with the data from recent events, which will help prepare safe havens under international sheltering, similar to what transpired in Libya when Benghazi was chosen as the command center of the temporary government. And then the next paragraph is important. If the situation unravels, there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, and this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want in order to isolate the Syrian regime. They anticipate a radical Salafist, that's that radical right Wahhabi, I don't know how it's all related, but that emanates from Saudi Arabia, the sort of crazy sect of Sunnis. A Salafist principality, they said, is a likely outcome, and the Western and the opposition powers, which includes the Western countries, this is the DIA talking again, once it knows it's going to happen and wants it to happen because it's going to isolate Syria, which will harm Iran. So they knew, they weren't oblivious to it. They knew it was an outcome, and it wasn't going to be an unwelcome outcome. Now, did they want ISIS, the exact Islamic State that came out of it, or did they just think it would be Al-Qaeda types, which they now distinguish, right? They now say, oh, Al-Qaeda is not quite as bad as the Islamic State. They're now making these distinctions. No, I'm not saying they wanted exactly, what's his name, Baghdadi, to declare himself the caliph and cutting off people's heads and doing what they're doing. But they anticipated, and not without concern, not with concern, that a Salafist principality would arise and isolate Assad because it was a way to get him and through him Iran.
Yeah.
It sounds conspiratorial, but there it is. That's a DIA document. And recently, the former head of the DIA, Thomas Flynn, I believe his name is, a general, was on an interview show, and you can find this at LevantReport.com, on Al Jazeera, talking about this. And he said, yes, I was aware of this report. He said, but my job was just intelligence, right? I wasn't a policymaker. And so the interviewer says, so they turned a blind eye to your report and what you were warning? He said, no, it wasn't a blind eye. It was a deliberate decision. You can read it. You can watch the interview online. I've watched it.
But I mean, I feel like this kind of thing has no effect on the people who want to go back to the Middle East and finish the job, I guess, or what have you. I don't know. ISIS is scary, but I mean, the scariness of ISIS now makes it harder to remember. Remember when Al Qaeda was the scariest thing around? Remember when the Taliban were the scariest kids around? I mean,
yeah.
All of these groups are totally horrendous, and the details of their activities are completely sickening. But every intervention just so breeds these worse and worse groups. I mean, it's all right there.
Right, and of course, Islamic State has spread Libya into the Sinai, lots of places. Yemen.
The general outrage. I'm just gonna pull this. The horror over ISIS. Like, I'm sure that people are sincerely horrified. Sure, I mean, it's easy to be sincerely horrified by ISIS. But the types of people who are just the most outraged and the most dying to go back in there are so often the people who are just really jazzed about, the newly trendy xenophobia that, Donald Trump has given us and stuff. And these groups that just, oppress these populations, and you go back to the Nazis and before, but these people who are so desperate to take them out militarily are the exact same people who have no interest in bringing in a couple million refugees or something, because they would be terrified to do that. I mean, They want to save these people in only the vaguest sense, when they're convenient. These women are being raped, these men are being killed, and I know they're not happy about that, sure, but that's, they wouldn't bring them here. They wouldn't do anything except, have that as a little part of the grand Middle Eastern plan, basically, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, because I think, Al Qaeda and Islamic State and any other crazy group you want to name furnishes a very good pretext for or a good argument in their eyes for the U.S. To not withdraw.
Yeah.
It's like, how can you withdraw when you got these groups? I mean, it's a perfect thing. Now, I'm sure they don't like that people's heads get cut off and that people are raped and otherwise brutalized, but it certainly makes it easier for them to maintain what they'd want to maintain anyway.
Yeah.
So it just works out real nicely for them. The existence of Islamic State means that we probably, it would be a bad idea for us to go wandering around Iraq and Syria. That would probably be a bad idea with them there, and I wouldn't do it, and I wouldn't advise anyone else to do it. I think we're pretty safe here, and we'd be safer if we withdrew altogether anyway, because the Islamic State doesn't even appear to be projecting its power. They can't look. The national security state can't make up its mind which is worse: agents of the Islamic State in the United States or lone wolves who have no connection whatsoever with the Islamic State. They can't decide which is worse. They know that somebody could be sitting at his or her computer and reading up on stuff and be offended that Muslims are being killed and bombed and otherwise tormented in the Middle East, and get mad and want to go shoot at a recruiting station. They know that can happen, but does it make them rethink the policy? No.
It doesn't.
It doesn't make them rethink the policy. Instead, they rethink things like Wesley Clark the other day saying, well, maybe we need camps to put young Muslims in to make sure they don't. I realize he didn't say the word Muslims. He comes back and says, I never said Muslims. The context was young Muslims.
Didn't he say radicals? I mean, or I'm trying to remember what he said. I think just camps in general, can we not, like, shout out to Michelle Malkin and her.
He didn't say new camps. He didn't say new camps, so he must have been meant existing camps.
Oh.
As if that somehow makes his position more palatable.
Oh,
he got very mad that people said he got very mad that people said that he wanted to set up new camps.
You realize how
the old
many
camps
people
are good enough.
will take that as a sign that the FEMA camp conspiracy theories are all true? Like, someone out there is going to be like,
Yeah.
It's all going to come together in their head when they hear you say that. So
See, the only thing that's unthinkable is the policy. To ward off this danger, this alleged danger, which is actually pretty minimal, but they can't rethink the policy. That is sacred. You can't talk about it. You know, you watch CNN or any of the major networks and see how much discussion you actually get about the policy and bring on a real critic of it. You never see it. Congressmen or Congress critters are brought on to spout all kinds of stuff. Nobody ever challenges them. The interviewer certainly doesn't challenge them, and they never bring them on with someone who can say, well, you're really wrong about that, and here's why. No, they just get, they bring Tom Cotton on, they bring other people on, and they're just allowed to speak nonstop as if everything they're saying must absolutely be true, because after all, they're in Congress.
I mean, as much of an obvious agenda as RT had, I kind of miss when people I like, excuse me, people I like would go on RT. I was on there once or twice before Putin started flexing his muscles and making everyone nervous. RT had a very obvious agenda to have people who were anti-American on, but that tended to often translate to more subversive people, some of whom who were very good, some of whom were people I know and like. And I was just musing on how I miss when that, as bad as agenda-driven as that was, it still felt different enough from the usual cable news.
Yeah.
Sunday morning.
News, my first career was as a news reporter. I worked for a small paper. I worked for the Associated Press. Then I worked for a slightly larger paper in Wilmington, Delaware. I'm in the main Delaware state newspaper. And so I have, I have some affection for that. I still romanticize the newspaper reporter a bit, beyond, I realize it's not related to the facts. And so I still take that seriously, and I took news reporting seriously. That you ought to try to be as neutral as you can be, and present, the various sides when there's a controversy. So when I watch the TV stations and read the major papers, it's just infuriating that they think this is coverage, that this is news coverage, that this is keeping the government honest. It's a joke. How can they? I don't see how they sleep at night, or don't they look in the mirror and say, I'm just a flack for the state? That's all I am. Why aren't I making more money than this? I mean, there's no way they can justify that they are informing the American people what's going on.
If they get handed,
so one-sided.
If they get handed a story, sometimes every once in a while they'll have a good story, but nobody digs. Nobody looks at an established government evil you and I would say is terrible. They don't get up one day and say, I'm going to start an investigative piece that questions why this exists, why this policy exists. If it gets handed to them, sometimes they'll cover it. Like, finally the mainstream media decided that police brutality was a national story 1 year ago. And that's, that's good, but my God, it took them a long time. I mean, they acted like it was a local story, or I did my my thesis on Waco and Ruby Ridge coverage, and there was I just carefully reading it, the way that they talked about it, the way that they acted as if the feds were giving them facts, as opposed to being half of a confrontation who was actually barring the media access to the other half.
Yeah.
And they would still talk about the feds as if they were some sort of intellectual source that was going to give them just the real thing. It's just, and with war stuff, it's almost worse. I mean, it's worse now than it is with cop stuff, because people are sort of finally trying to get on Radley Balko's level of a decade ago. Though they're not there yet. But there isn't really anybody. Jeremy Scahill, it is very good. But there's so, I don't know. Again, I think like Eric Garris of anti-war about this. Just this idea that to report on the Iran deal is to report on what various scumbags, to editorialize, who are running for president are saying about the Iran deal.
Exactly.
Not what it actually said.
Right.
Because, I don't know, Americans, we can't. We're so lazy. I don't know if it's unique to America or not, honestly, because I have such an American perspective. But
yeah, I don't know.
we're just we don't. All I can think of is it's a lack of empathy and sort of an atrophied sense of empathy and understanding, and just
right.
Like,
They think they've covered the the waterfront if they have a Republican and a Democrat.
Right, exactly.
Then they're fair, even though they're both hawks. Even though they both say you can't trust the Iranians, it's in their DNA to be deceitful, which is what what's her name, Wendy, the head negotiator. The head negotiator for Obama at this P5+1 talks had been quoted as saying in front of Congress, testimony, that it's in their DNA. Wendy Sherman, it's in their DNA.
Oh, that's vile. That's vile.
Deceitful.
That's I missed that. That's,
so I've never seen anyone. I don't think I've ever seen anyone on one of the major networks question whether Iran is even interested in having a nuclear weapon, ever talking about the fatwa issued by their supreme leader, the Ayatollah, having Gareth Porter on. I mean, you got a perfect person right there, an accomplished award-winning journalist who's written a weighty book filled with documentation, making the case that it's a manufactured crisis. I've never heard that he'd been on CNN or MSNBC. Won't even talk about Fox. The closest you get to that is on CNN at least is Hillary Mann Leverett, and she makes a lot of good, reasonable points. I haven't seen her lately on CNN, but she gets on once in a while. But I'm not sure she stresses, and I'm not sure what her own position is on the Gareth Porter point that it's a completely manufactured crisis.
Yeah.
That there was nuclear weapons program, and there's evidence to back that claim up. She kind of leaves that alone and talks about how the negotiations, we need to encourage the negotiations, and I'm sure she, thinks this agreement should be permitted to go into effect. So what she says is good, but even she doesn't go deep enough. There's nobody coming on and really questioning the whole thing.
Yeah.
Once in a while you'll see them say that the CIA, overthrew an elected government in 1953, which made the Iranians kind of mad at us.
That's an accomplishment if they notice that.
Once in a blue moon.
Yeah.
Once in a blue moon that will get mentioned. But it's as if, okay, that's ancient history. That's got no significance. That was so long ago that surely that can't have any bearing.
Everything except 2001, 1979, and I guess 2012 because of Benghazi. Like, those are the only years that aren't ancient history. Oh, and 1938, of course, is also very current, very relevant, constantly.
And it's like Groundhog Day because every year is 1938.
I'm telling you, Jonathan Chait, I'm not a fan, but I believe he's the one who gathered like a collection of William Crystal calling everything 1938, and it was just this list. And I was like, Jonathan Chait, everything is forgiven because this is so beautiful. Dear.
Yeah.
All right, but so you and I think, acknowledge that Iran is not 70 million suicidal people, even if they have some theocratic elements.
Yeah.
But something like ISIS, I think it reminds a lot of people about, Imperial Japan or anyone where there's this sort of religiosity and sort of this suicidal lack of self-preservation. I know they want, the caliphate and they want land, sort of more tangible things. But, their fighters are very happy to be martyred in battle because that's their thing. And I think that somebody savvy might give you Iran, okay, there's a lot of rational people who want to keep living and trading and thriving, but maybe ISIS is a different animal. And I know they say that every time about every new threat, but, what do we say to that, I guess, is the question.
Well, I don't want to live under ISIS. I don't want to live under any theocracy, given my attitude toward religion. I certainly don't want to give, or the civic theocracy we live under here. I don't want any.
Yes.
Because the funny thing is, and Scott Horton likes to point this out, that the two forces best poised to combat ISIS are Iran and Assad, because Assad still has an effective army. He's not. People keep predicting how his government's going to fall, but it hasn't fallen.
Yeah.
even though ISIS and then the Al Qaeda affiliates are holding some territory, he doesn't seem to be, tottering. So he's got a military, and the Iranians have a military. So if I'm not talking about a libertarian now, but if someone who's just sort of obsessed with ISIS and wants to see ISIS defeated, it seems to me you'd want to encourage Assad in Iran. Now, in a way, we're on Iran's side, right? The U.S. is on Iran's side in Iraq, but it's against Assad in Syria. It also says it's against ISIS and the Al Qaeda affiliates, but it's also fighting Assad. So when you fight Assad, you're helping the other side.
Yeah.
And they still claim that there are these moderates, right? These moderates they're going to train, and something like they spent millions of dollars and trained like 40 or 50 people so far. It's a joke.
Yeah.
And Hillary was saying in 2011, when she was being criticized for why isn't the U.S. doing more to overthrow Assad, she said something like, well, it's not as if they're moderates there, in the opposition. So back when it was convenient to admit there were no moderates in the opposition, she was willing to do that.
Well, I mean, there may be somewhere a few, but the idea that the U.S. with its history can be trusted to find them, and that even to train them would do any good is the absurd part. I'm sure there are people in that disaster of a situation who would like Assad and most of the fighters both to go away so they can, live and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's a very, very bad plan.
And there's been some great work done recently by a very good journalist that I've known for a long time, Jonathan Marshall. You can find his things on Anti-War, but a lot of them originating at Consortium News. And he's retold the history now of Syria in a couple of different articles. The U.S. bears a big responsibility for that turning into such a horrible civil war. Now, Assad's a bad guy. His father was a dictator. However, let's remember, the Bush administration, the United States, would send people they captured in Iraq and Afghanistan, I guess, to Syria to have them tortured. It was called extraordinary rendition.
Yeah.
Okay, Obama says we don't do it anymore. I don't know. But we didn't mind Assad being a vicious torturer when we needed his services, or he outsourced torturing to his father. And I forget when the son comes into office exactly. So maybe the son too. So all of a sudden we're outraged by how brutal the Assad family is. But when they were working for us, hey, it was okay. Thank goodness. Assad did attack peaceful protesters in the early days of this, when this started to break out in 2011. He did, very bad things. I don't want to say anything nice about Assad. But he needed to effect some sort of reconciliation, and so there was I think something in the works regarding the European Union to where people would sit down and talk, and the fighting would stop. And he showed willingness to do that, and the U.S. blocked it. They blocked this accord to have people sit down and talk, even though there was outside support for it. But the U.S. did not want that. They had decided he has to go. And of course, as soon as you announce he's got to go, and you put the U.S. potential muscle behind it, you're now taking a stand, implying you might do something about it. That then turns Syria into a magnet for the Mujahideen types, right? The jihadists who were in Iraq, who moved over to Syria, thinking, okay, this guy's going to fall now because the U.S. has declared itself. And Hillary, by the way, was one of the people saying, he's got to go, he's lost all legitimacy. Like she's a source of legitimacy. So U.S. policy creates these issues. Now, I'm not saying it's the only thing that creates problems. Okay, I know people like to caricature our position and say, "Oh, you think everything would be great in the world if the U.S. just came home." No, there's bad people who would try to trash other people and rule other people. But if you go back and look at the particulars in case after case, even if the U.S. hasn't originated the problem, it aggravates the problem. Right. It did it back in the Balkan stuff, from 1995 through '99 with Serbia, Bosnia, and Kosovo. You go read the details. Yes, the U.S. aggravates stuff, and it's not just bumbling. There's an agenda there.
Yeah. It feels bumbling because you have so many people advocating for certain things and then being sort of outraged or horrified when it goes awry. And like, I don't know, I always think of things like the Strategic Hamlet program in Vietnam,
Yeah.
which just like pisses me off to think about it. The idea that people are going to react exactly the way these grand planners want them to. I mean, it is domestic, liberalism, but also conservatism, obviously, let's be real.
Mm-hmm.
Like the type of, we'll pass this law and fix this problem, but it's on an international scale, and instead of, sort of just a legal declaration, which is bad enough and obviously forceful enough, it's a war declaration. They think that people will react like robots and they will not learn the lesson, no matter how many centuries it takes, that is not how human beings react to things. They react differently than that. They are resentful. They are angry. It doesn't matter how noble the cause stated by the invading army is. Generally, people are resentful of an invading army. I mean, that army could have the purest sounding agenda ever written down, and people would still be resentful, and I understand that. So, I mean, I think it's such a human reaction. And these people, that is why this type of person does not believe that these people are human beings. Not really. I don't think they know that they don't believe that, but the way that they act, the way that they act as if these people should act, is like they're puppets. They think that their wills can be bended just by a really nice
Adam Smith calls these people the men of system in the Theory of Moral Sentiments. He talks about the men of system, and how you can spot that such a person is he sees the society, in this case foreign societies, as a chessboard.
Yes.
And that the people are just pieces on the chessboard to be moved as this man of system wishes, not realizing that they have their own principle of motion. I mean, Smith, as usual, is brilliant. I mean, he wasn't talking about foreign intervention, but it easily just applies there too. It's the planner. It applies
to all humanity, yeah.
Social engineer who has to regard the people as inert, that could just be moved around in the right place in accordance with the plan, not wanting to admit that the people will have their own ideas, and they will resist.
And literally all of human history is there to refute these plans, and they still will not learn this lesson, this one lesson. And
if you can't do it domestically, how much harder is it to do it if you can't do it domestically, and they can't, how much harder is it to do it in a foreign society where you don't know the culture? You think these people, Wolfowitz and those guys, understood Iranian culture, Syrian culture? No, cultures are very complex. Societies are complex, and so what they couldn't even do in one state in the United States, where they speak the language and pretty much understand the culture, the case against them trying to do it in a foreign country is overwhelming, just because of all the additional complications. I mean, any society is complex to begin with, but make it one that's foreign that a mania to think that you could do that, and yet that's what they plan to do.
And these people so often are very shamelessly disinterested in the culture. They're not even the faux expert who thinks because they know they've read hundreds of books, then they can manufacture it. Often they just shamelessly are disinterested. They don't know very much about these places at all. Vietnam was certainly like that, I think.
Yeah, this 1996 plan of action I mentioned that the neocons put together, and by the way, Netanyahu was kind of in on this. He wasn't, and this was a plan that he embraced, and they were friends with Netanyahu. They talked about how they were going to overthrow Iraq, kick out Saddam Hussein, and put in a Hashemite king. And so Scott Horton had a good interview with David Bromwich, who was writing about this, who's a professor of literature at Yale and a very good analyst of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and understands it very well. He said, yeah, they drop in the name Hashemite to sound erudite, right? To sound scholarly. Yeah, we'll install a Hashemite monarchy. You know, it's a family. It's a prominent family. King Hussein and then King Abdullah now of Jordan are Hashemites, and you know,
okay.
it's one of the competing families. And so, and a Hashemite was originally under the British plan was supposed to rule Iraq, except he got overthrown. The plan didn't quite work there. But we'll just install a Hashemite king in Iraq, and like everything will be fine because hey, it's our plan, and we're Americans. What could go wrong?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, this is just, it all goes back to America needs to do whatever the fuck it wants when it needs to. And that's how you can ally with a monster one day and call him a monster tomorrow because you needed to do it because you are the United States. I mean, I think it's almost that, it's that basic in terms, like, I'm endlessly searching for like a practicality or a morality in these decisions, even a twisted morality, and it isn't there. It's the U.S. needs to do what it needs to do. And, I mean, I've asked people, how bad, you know, how bad can the U.S., how bad are you permitted to be before you're still, you know, the good guys, the morally superior side? And it doesn't matter. I mean, it's not about that. It's the U.S. is the U.S., and it must do what it must do, and that's sort of all. There's nothing to say. It's like they hold all the cards in their hands, all the vocabulary.
Well, it's like Nixon. You know, Nixon said, if the president does it, it's not illegal. So if the U.S. does it,
if the U.S. does it, it's not
can't
immoral.
be bad. It can't be bad. So right, nothing can happen because we're we're the chosen nation. We're the indispensable nation. We're the exceptional nation. We got all these terms to justify.
But be exceptional, for God's sake. I mean, you know, if it's true, then maybe
it is.
Don't.
It's exceptional. Not the way you want to think of it. It is.
Yeah.
No one's dropped an A-bomb on civilians yet, or actually anywhere else, except the United States. So
that's right, of course.
We just went through that anniversary, 70th anniversary.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going to happen because I don't see anybody showing any kind of wisdom, you know, who's in any prominent position. I mean, Obama's the best we got.
Yeah.
Which isn't saying much. I mean, we presumably this agreement's not going to be killed by Congress. At least they won't have veto. They're not veto proof. But of course, it could be very short-lived because if a Republican gets in 2017, all of them have vowed to what? To end it, right? To tear it up, to impose sanctions.
Yeah.
And I think Scott Walker's even promised to start a war with Iran on his first day. You know?
Yeah, he seems like a bit of a monster after all that.
And here's a guy who, you know, certainly true of a lot of them, knows absolutely nothing about foreign policy. You know, he's been a governor, and what did he do? He talked to a couple of, he says he talked to a couple of leaders of Gulf states, so now he's, and you know, and who knows who's advising him. Trump says he's getting advice from John Bolton.
Oh, geez, that's right. He loves Bolton.
Bolton has called for war. Bolton is one of the few people who are saying, you know what, Obama's right. It's either this agreement or war. We can't get we could never get an agreement we want, Bolton said. So does Joshua Moravchik think that, and Norman Podhoretz and Crystal. So they're saying that Obama is right. If it's not this agreement, it is war, and why wait? Let's just have the war now. That's what they say. And Bolton is one of those people.
They like war. I'm so glad that I booed John Bolton in real life. I feel like that will be on my tombstone, and it'll be a good, rich life.
He's helping to advise Trump. Trump says he likes him. I don't know if he actually says he calls him up. He also says he gets his military advice by watching the Sunday morning shows.
Oh, Jesus.
So we don't want to turn this into the Trump thing. We can next time. Our next session should be on Trump. We can talk about just Trump.
Oh God, that's. So
I think he's an Americanized Mussolini, but I'll just use that as a teaser. We can take that up next time.
Oh yeah, you and Jeffrey, you're both going full Trump is an actual fascist. And the audacity of that using that word. I enjoy.
And I don't think he's that different from the rest of them. I just think he's a caricature of the others. So that's my position. I don't really. I think he's, you know what a caricature does, right? It takes some distinguishing characteristics and really exaggerates them. I think
Right.
that's Trump. Not that different
That is.
from all the rest of them.
That's very accurate,
But
disturbingly
we can
so.
hold that. I mean, Jeff and I talked about Trump the last time, so we can skip this one and keep on the Middle East and talk about. There'll be more Trump developments between now and 2 weeks from now.
I'm sure there will. All right, so
the question is, how's it going to get any better? If a Republican gets elected, it's not going to be better. If Hillary gets elected, look, I heard her, and this is okay. She's quote the dove, right, of the people running for president at the moment. I don't even think we can. I don't even know that Sanders is more dovish than she is. I think he's a total phony.
I think he's a little.
I saw her talking the other day. Yeah, we talk about him in a second. Yeah. I saw her talking about the other day, defending the agreement on Iran, right? What do they call it? The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Okay, defending it in the most hawkish terms about how terrible Iran is, how it can't be trusted, how it's the chief sponsor of terrorism in the world. You know, lots of people say that. You never see any evidence for it. You never see anybody spell it out. It's just one of those things we believe.
Yeah.
It's like the 2 minutes of hate in 1984, right? You stand up and you scream, Iran is the chief state sponsor of terrorism. Iran is the chief. No one can ever give you any evidence. But there's been stuff on anti-war refuting it. It's just that the hawks if there's any violence anywhere in the world, the hawks blame Iran. So now we have this impression that Iran's behind all violence. You wouldn't believe, to listen to Hillary in that speech, you wouldn't believe she was in favor of the agreement. If you didn't hear that line, but all the rest of it, you think, oh, she must be against the agreement. So now Sanders votes for war funding. He's voted for bad stuff, mass incarceration, crime bills that have introduced tough mandatory minimums. Okay, that's not war and peace. I realize that's the domestic war and peace. But on foreign war and peace, what's he done? Okay, I think he voted for the Iraq. He says he voted for the Iraq resolution. He voted against it. Although he voted for the 2001 Afghan authorization of force.
Hey, so did Ron Paul.
Yeah, that's true. But then he votes for every appropriation to keep the wars going. Yeah. A true anti-war person would be making a big stand on it every time he had a chance to vote.
He's not anti-war, but I mean, to be better than Hillary, is not that difficult. So if he is a hair better, it doesn't say much,
Except he doesn't talk about it. Instead, he talks about minimum wage and stuff like that.
Or the Koch conspiracy of open borders. I mean,
I can't be for open borders because the Kochs are for open borders. There's a man of courage and conviction who thinks for himself. Tell me what the Kochs are for, and I'll tell you what I'm against. That's his attitude.
That was hideous. That was so hideous.
I mean, it's a joke.
I mean, he can't be against mass incarceration and criminal justice reform because the Kochs were on that long before he,
that's exactly
was
right.
obligated to chime in on it. So
I saw a Koch representative on Amy Goodman's Democracy. What's it called? Democracy Today.
Democracy
making
Now.
an impassioned argument against this mass incarceration. He was on with I forget who it was, somebody from the left on with him, and Amy Goodman was loving it. Mm-hmm. This guy was eloquent. He's like an executive vice president of Koch Industries, condemning the these policies of having so many people in prison. It was great. Here's a question popping up. Oh,
yeah,
it just disappeared. I lost it.
Oh no, it's there. It's on the chat. It's what's the first thing you would say to someone who strongly advocates Iran sanctions because they'll start a nuclear war if we don't? I mean, nuclear war, we can't poke around.
You need to have nuclear weapons to start a nuclear war. Number one, that's a point of logic.
Yes.
I think we can say that a priori. Look, first of all, another myth is that Iran. It was sanctions that got Iran to the table.
Yeah.
So we had them where we wanted them, and then we let them squirm out. Okay, that's the Republican line. Well, first of all, in 2003, Iran made a comprehensive offer, a grand bargain to the Bush administration to sit down and talk about all outstanding issues between the two countries, including their suspicions about nuclear weapons. Made a grand bargain. The Swiss, we don't talk to the Iranians, so the Swiss were the go-between.
Right.
And by the way, as part of this grand bargain, they were willing to talk about the Palestinians too, and they embraced the Arab initiative that Saudi Arabia had put forward a year or so before that, like 2002 or something, and then later on it was renewed, which talked about a comprehensive settlement of the Palestinian issue, recognition of Israel. This is the Arab League now offering this recognition of Israel in a two-state context. That was incorporated in the grand bargain that Iran communicated to the Bush administration. Keep in mind that Iran cooperated after 9/11 also with the U.S. But the U.S. quickly realized, no, we don't want the cooperation. So in 2002, in the State of the Union address, that's when Bush famously named Iran as a member of the axis of evil, including Iraq. Iraq and Iran fought for almost 10 years in the 80s, a vicious, brutal war launched by Iraq. Anyway, they're co-members of the axis of evil and North Korea.
Yeah.
So this is how we thanked Iran for its help after 9/11. And there were people in the streets in Tehran after 9/11 in sympathy demonstrations for the United States. That didn't happen in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. It happened in Iran. Just for the record now. I'm not a fan of that regime.
I know, but that makes me want to cry when I think about it.
They had signs and were demonstrating. The Iranian people like America. They hate the government's policies, but they like America and they like Americans. It's a very well-educated, middle-class country. It's in a way, it's an amazing country. It's a very old country. It's the only country there that's not an artificial country in the Middle East. The others are all created by Britain and France. This actually goes back thousands of years. And by the way, there's an ancient Jewish community with 25 synagogues and a big hospital in Tehran and they freely practice their religion. Now, maybe they're hit with some taxes. I'm not saying it's a free country, but they openly practice their religion. Okay? How many synagogues do you think are in downtown Riyadh?
Yeah.
That many. How many churches are in Riyadh? That many. By the way, just for the record, the Christians in Syria are backing Assad. They don't want ISIS or Al-Qaeda taking over Syria. And all those other religious minorities are on Assad's side. Again, I'm not pro-Assad, but let's get these facts on the record. Okay, so Iran makes this grand bargain. You'd think they'd jump at it. No, they don't. Bush shoves it aside, and he berates the Swiss for even communicating it to the United States. Don't you bring us stuff like that. That's how Iran got treated.
Yeah.
Then they started putting in centrifuges, probably as bargaining chips. So it wasn't the sanctions that got Iran to the table. It was the centrifuges, which went from almost none to like 19,000 or whatever. It was the centrifuges that got the U.S. to the bargaining table, not the sanctions that got Iran to the bargaining table.
And that's a great lesson for Iran. I mean, that's a lesson.
So more sanctions. You know who made money who's been making money off the sanctions and don't like the agreement either? The hardest liners in Iran.
Yeah.
What's it called? The Revolutionary Force, Revolutionary Guard.
Yeah.
They make a bundle because they control the economy and they're doing very well, although the people are not doing well. They make money off the sanctions because they're involved in the black market. They control the black market. So the sanctions only hurt regular people. They have trouble getting medicines. They're dying because of it. Or they're hungry, or food is very expensive. They import food, they import gasoline. They can't participate in the international finance system. If you go over there, you wouldn't be able to use your credit card over there, stuff like that. So for Tom Cotton and those guys to say, we can get a better deal by imposing more sanctions is nonsense. For one thing, don't forget, 5 other countries are in on this agreement on the U.S. side, right? The 5 permanent members of, the 4 other permanent members of the Security Council, plus Germany, that's the 5 plus 1, plus Germany, all have signed on to this, and the Security Council has unanimously endorsed it. So if the U.S. were to pull out and try to put on sanctions, do you think Russia, China, Germany, France, England, and Germany, and I guess I named them all, are going to go along? They're not. So the sanctions regime would be just the U.S. The U.S. would be isolated, and Iran would be able to come in from out of the shadows and be again part of the international economic system. I'm not saying the U.S. couldn't still inflict some damage on them; they could, but it's not the way it's been, where the U.S. was able to get most of the big countries to go on board, come aboard with them. Mm-hmm. It's a whole changed situation now. So no, and besides, what better agreement are you going to get? what Crystal and those guys want, they know they would never get, and that's why they want it, because it'll lead to war. They want a total capitulation by Iran, a total, abandonment of national sovereignty. Now, I'm not a fan of national sovereignty, but we do live in a state system, and Iran's not going to be the first to give up national sovereignty. I'm sorry, and they know darn well. When they say the U.S. ought to have immediate 24/7 access to every site, not just nuclear sites, but any military site, Iran's not going to go for that, because they know the inspectors are going to have CIA spies spying on their other kinds of military research and capability.
That is not.
And who are they going to turn it over to? They're going to turn it over to the Israelis. Everybody knows that. So there's not going to be a quote better deal. There's going to be war.
That's not how you get a country to trust you, and that's not how you actually get a relationship that might include trade or something like that. I mean, Cuba, the obligatory but sincere disclaimer, hate the Castros, but, the Cuba hating the U.S., there's a long history, and there's a very solid reason why that would be true, including it being written, the U.S. basically gets to come in if it feels the hankering to, right there in the official. Yeah. I mean, like that. How can they not see that just brings anti-U.S. sentiment? That's why people chant, death to the U.S. in the streets, which of course is the worst crime anyone has ever committed in human history, is to chant something against the U.S. and to perhaps burn a flag even. There's nothing I could possibly imagine that's worse than that.
And as I said on Facebook, if you were trying to prevent me from trading with the world, I'd burn your flag too. Yeah. Anyway, I hate to interrupt you, but it's 6:00 by my time, Pacific, at 6:03, and we are obligated to make some announcements. Remember, or else Mike Reed will be very angry at us. Yes. Number one, Mike Reed will be interviewing Norman Horn tonight at 9:30 Eastern.
And here's the link. I put the link.
And then the Unbiased America show with guest star Wayne Allen Root will be tomorrow night at 8 Eastern. And then, if you want to see more of Lucy and me, along with Walter Block, before our regular next meeting, which is 2 weeks from tonight, you can see the three of us on the 28th at, what time is it, 9 o'clock?
Yeah.
Yes, 9 o'clock Eastern, p.m. We're going to be discussing, not debating, we're going to be discussing left libertarianism, and Lucy's going to moderate because she's such a moderate person. Walter Block and me.
And,
so,
yeah, if you have anything you want me to ask, sorry, Sheldon, or just drop me a line somewhere, because I'm still trying to figure out, what needs to be covered and what needs to be said. Okay. So if anybody has something they're dying to have Sheldon and/or Walter discuss or answer, then just let me know, and I'll bring it up.
Well, I have that article in the I can send you the link to my article in the American Conservative about left libertarianism and the unknown ideal. I think it was called something like that, which I'm gratified that people point to as a good thing to read if you want to know what left libertarianism is. So that ought to prompt. That's got some history. That's got history and theory, and should prompt some points for discussion. I have a feeling you're going to have no trouble with this. This is going to be all very spontaneous, and we're going to not be able to cover most of what we want just because we're going to have so much. And hey, you're not moderating two shrinking violets. Let's say.
Right. It'll be good because I agree with you.
Walter Block and I have never been accused of being shy.
I agree with you on
so
everything.
Anyway, thank you, everybody.
Yes, go. Hold on. Go read Sheldon's work at the Free Association. The most recent interesting thing
SheldonRichman.com. Most of it's at Reason. You can find it at some at Counterpunch, and also Liberty.me has everything. It immediately puts up everything. But it originates at SheldonRichman.com, which is Free Association, my blog. Lucy, read Lucy at Any War. Great column.
I did a Federalist piece. All of the conservative commenters hated me, even though it was pro-gun rights. But go read that. It's my most recent interesting thing. I guess that's it. Thanks for joining us. Sheldon, lovely as always. Thanks for ranting.
See you on the 28th.
It's very heartening. Okay, bye. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.